On the 14th of April 2018, Pamburn Philosophy hosted a debate between Jordan Peterson and Matt Dillahunty, and in my opinion it was extremely fruitful, because unlike most who converse with Jordan, Matt didn't let him get away with the usual ambiguity and sophistry. Instead, he made him clarify his beliefs, and in doing so revealed many of them for what they are: fallacious and vacuous. Anyhow, during the Q&A segment, the fantastic Ozymandias asked Jordan the following.
What, in your view, would a genuine atheist be like?
He'd be like Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment. See, Raskolnikov built himself up to the murder in part by laying out the rational case, but also by saying, well, there's no God. There's no metaphysical reason that's stopping me from committing this act.
This is Atheists Are Murderers, Debunked.
My question is for you, Dr. Peterson. You alluded to an important distinction between someone who would actually be an atheist and someone who merely professes to be an atheist. You implied that Matt and others are not genuinely atheists.
I can tell you that I actually don't believe in a God, and I could write
But you act
poetry.
like you do.
Huh?
But you act like you do.
They would be afraid of what we would lose if we lost religion. And I basically said, demonstrate to me any benefit.
Oh, you'd lose art and poetry and drama and narrative and
Why?
story.
Are there no godless artists and poets?
Well, there are artists and poets who think they're godless.
I'm curious why you think that. Is it just because we have sacred values, that everyone has sacred values? What, in your view, would a genuine atheist be like?
He'd be like Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment. And I can't really come up with a better answer than that, because it's such a complicated question that that's the right answer.
No, it's not such a complicated question. Jordan just needs it to be, because mystery is a convenient excuse for absurdity. A theist is someone who's convinced that at least one God exists, and an atheist, with the prefix a meaning not, is someone who is not convinced that a God exists. That's it. Or, as Matt put it,
An atheist is somebody who doesn't believe there's a God. I am not convinced there's a God. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm convinced there are no gods, although that is a subset of, hey, I don't believe there's a God, and then there's a subset that is, I believe there are no gods. This is, as I've talked about previously, independent of whether or not I can be a moral being or do good things, is independent from whether or not there's awe and wonder or purpose and meaning in my life.
anyhow, here's the explanation that Jordan gave.
It's so interesting because Dostoevsky, the last thing Dostoevsky ever did was make a straw man out of his opponents, let's say. What Dostoevsky did in all of his great novels was make his enemies, let's say, or make each of the positions that he was trying to contend with as powerful and admirable as he possibly could. And since he was an absolutely spectacular genius, he could really do that. And so Raskolnikov plots a murder. And he murders this horrible woman, who's horrible according to everyone who knows her, who also has enslaved her rather mentally feeble niece, and who does nothing but make people miserable consciously all the time. And he does that in order to save his sister from a rather sophisticated form of prostitution, to save himself from starvation so that he can become a great lawyer and help people. Right? So Dostoevsky sets up the stage. Here is the perfect situation for a murder, and all of the rational choices point in that direction. And Raskolnikov, who's also sort of torturing himself, or sort of tortured because he's sort of hungry and not very well, not thinking very clearly, he undertakes the murder, and he gets away with it. And before he does it, he berates himself in what I would describe as the negative atheistic style. And he basically says, look, there is every rational reason to split this woman's skull with an axe. Look at all the good I would do. Look at all the well-being I would enhance. And so he does it. And then all hell breaks loose. And what Dostoevsky was Raskolnikov built himself up to the murder in part by laying out the rational case, but also by saying, well, there's no God. There's no metaphysical reason that's stopping me from committing this act. And there's all these reasons that appear perfectly rational, pushing me in that direction. Perhaps I'm nothing but a moral coward for failing to undertake it. So he does. But what he finds out is that he broke an inviolable moral rule, something that spoke to his own soul, so to speak. And the rest of the book basically involves his sequential post-traumatic unraveling.
Now, there's a fair amount to address here, and so I'm going to do so one step at a time. First off, in response to the statement,
the last thing Dostoevsky ever did was make a straw man out of his opponents.
While I won't go so far as to say that Dostoevsky strawmanned atheism, as the act of strawmanning requires deliberate misrepresentation, I will say that because he was insufficiently vicarious, he nevertheless achieved as much. That is, because of his ignorance, he misrepresented atheism, and more specifically, the many mindsets and worldviews of those who aren't convinced that a God exists. You see, the religious, be them Christians, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, pagans, or whatever, almost always attribute their sense of right and wrong, that is, their morality, to their religious edicts, and thus when trying to understand the mindset of those who don't subscribe to their religion, they tend to almost always assume that such considerations are absent. And that's precisely what Dostoevsky did, and indeed what Jordan does too. In fact, it's evidently precisely because of this that Jordan asserts that Western civilization is based on Judeo-Christian values, and that the likes of Sam Harris are actually Christian.
Harris's metaphysics is fundamentally Christian.
I can tell you that I actually don't believe in a God, and I could write
But you act
poetry.
like you do. Well, there are artists and poets who think they're godless.
Now, in most cases, this flawed way of thinking is understandable, albeit insulting, as most religious people don't sufficiently understand the process of evolution by natural selection, let alone the specific evolution of social species and social norms. But the same can't be said of Jordan. He knows better. In fact, his primary claim about the validity of religion is nested in Jungian archetypes, and the primary premise of Jungian archetypes is that we are not born with a blank slate, but rather, just as we inherit physical characteristics, such as eye colour and bone density, so too we inherit psychological characteristics, such as the fear of snakes, and, here's the kicker, the repulsion to the idea of murdering another human. Or to put this another way, just as it was the case that those who had a genetic disposition to fear snakes reproduced more successfully than those who didn't, so too it was the case that those who had a genetic disposition to feel disgust at the idea of murder reproduced more successfully than those who didn't. And thus, just as we are born with the propensity to fear snakes, so too we are born with the propensity not to murder. Jordan can't accept psychological inheritance when it fits his narrative, but deny it when it doesn't. That's not how it works. And so, when Raskolnikov, Dostoevsky, or Jordan says,
there is every rational reason to split this woman's skull with an axe,
they're wrong. Sure, we could say that there's every external reason, but not every internal. Dostoevsky failed to consider the biggest reason of all for Raskolnikov not to bury an axe in Ilona's head. That being the fact that he is a member of a social species that has evolved an innate, deeply rooted repulsion of murder, and that because of this, such an act wouldn't just hurt Ilona, but would necessarily hurt him too. Now, to cover all angles, in the past, Jordan has said that someone's psychological inheritance, or implicit axioms, is their religion.
Everything you act out is predicated on your implicit axioms. And the system of implicit axioms that you hold as primary is your religious belief system.
And so perhaps, because he's defined an atheist as someone who's devoid of psychological inheritance, or implicit axioms, he's conflating his definition of religion with his definition of theist. But considering Matt's profile, character, and clarity, and the context of the conversation, if Jordan did do this, then I'm hereby accusing him of being deliberately obtuse and obfuscating. In any case, ask yourself, if Ray Comfort or William Lane Craig asserted that all atheists are murderers, how would you react? Would you allow them to redefine every relevant word to make such a sentence coherent? I don't think so. And so just in case you're inclined to allow Jordan such a luxury, please consider not. Anyhow, just before wrapping up, I couldn't do so without showing Matt's wonderful response, and so here it is.
There were atheist fans who wrote me that were like, oh man, I can't wait till you do this conversation with Jordan. And I was like, cool. And still, I hope that we have many more conversations as well. Because just saying one thing that I find irritating is never going to be enough to get rid of me. But I asked them, great, I'm not that familiar with him. What is it about him that you like, and what are the concerns? And they came back with a bunch of things. None of them said anything about agreeing with views on religion. They seemed very confused on those things. And so the good news for them is that while he thinks atheists would be murderers, he doesn't actually think you're an atheist. And that is his way of getting around acknowledging things that conflict with his worldview. I don't get to decide who is or isn't a true Christian. I didn't even get to decide that when I was a believer. I definitely don't get to do it now. So if somebody tells me they're a Christian, I'm going to have to accept that. I have a model in my head of what that means. I have a model in my head of what it means to be a Muslim, but I'm willing for them to explain to me what their model is. I know people who identify as Christian atheists. They really love the stuff that Jesus said, but they don't actually believe there's God. You know, Thomas Jefferson famously cut out the Jefferson Bible and removed every reference to the supernatural and miracles and things like that because he really admired the teachings of it. And sure, I think you could be a cultural Christian in that if you wanted to. It's strange to me that I'm not sitting here with somebody like Ray Comfort when I'm told you're not really an atheist because you're too good to be an atheist. And this is what atheists hear all the time when they come out. They've been sidelined because of religious privilege around the world for years. And then atheists come out to their family members or friends or people they've known for years, and they're like, "You're an atheist? How can that be? You're such a good person. I've known you all this time." It's because the mindset of what people have about what an atheist is has been poisoned by religious proclamations. We have been denigrated from the pulpit, and it has seeped into every aspect of culture, right up to the height of intellectual pursuits. And it's time for that to end.
As always, thank you kindly for the view, and an extra special thank you to my wonderful patrons and those of you who have donated via PayPal. This month's patron of the month is Jeremy Franson, and you've won Lying by Sam Harris. Congratulations, and thank you for your support. Until next time, my fellow apes, until next time.